There's a place in America where the land dissolves into water so gradually that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins, where a river flows 70 miles wide but barely an inch deep, moving so slowly you could walk faster than it runs, where alligators and crocodiles, the only place on Earth where both exist together, patrol waters that feed 7 million people, where an invasion by giant snakes has caused mammals to vanish at a rate of 99%. This isn't the Amazon, this isn't Africa, this is the Florida Everglades. And it shouldn't exist anymore, not really. Because by every measure of human ambition and engineering prowess, we tried to kill it. We drained it. We dammed it. We carved it into sections with hundreds of miles of canals. We redirected its water to sugarcane fields and sprawling suburbs. We reduced it to half its original size and choked what remained with agricultural runoff and invasive species that now consume everything in their path. The Everglades should be a memory, a cautionary tale, another ecosystem sacrificed on the altar of progress. But here's the thing about the Everglades. It refuses to die. Against all odds, despite a century of assault, despite being carved up and poisoned and invaded, this vast wetland continues to breathe. And now, in the largest and most expensive environmental restoration project in human history, we're trying to bring it back from the edge. The story begins long before humans arrived. 5,000 years ago, yesterday, in geological terms, South Florida's climate shifted to its current subtropical character. Seasonal rains began falling in torrents, sometimes 18 to 24 inches in a single day. The Kissimmee River fed Lake Okeechobee, which overflowed its southern rim and sent water creeping across limestone bedrock so flat, so level, that a 6-inch change in elevation could transform sawgrass prairie into hardwood hammock. This water didn't rush, it didn't carve, canyons or tumble over falls. It simply moved 100 feet per day in a sheet flow 40 to 70 miles wide. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the journalist who would become the Everglades' fiercest defender, looked at this phenomenon in 1947 and gave it a name that changed everything: River of Grass. Before Douglas, people called it a swamp, worthless land, an abominable, pestilence-ridden obstacle to Florida's development. Politicians promised to drain it, entrepreneurs sold parcels sight unseen to northern investors, and the Army Corps of Engineers built massive engineering projects to control what they saw as wasted water. After Douglas, people began to understand this wasn't a swamp, it was a river, an ecosystem, a vast, intricate machine that purified water, stored carbon, protected coastlines from hurricanes, and sustained a biodiversity unlike anywhere else in North America. But by the time people understood what the Everglades was, we'd already broken it. The numbers tell a brutal story. In 1900, the Everglades covered nearly 11,000 square miles. Today, barely half remains. The water that once flowed unimpeded from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay now encounters 1,800 miles of levees and canals, dozens of pump stations, and water control structures that dictate when, where, and how much water flows. The consequences ripple across the entire ecosystem. Wading bird populations, wood storks, roseate spoonbills, white ibis, have declined by 90%. The Florida panther, once ranging across the entire southeast, now clings to survival with fewer than 200 individuals left in the wild. Seagrass beds in Florida Bay, starved of the fresh water they need, collapsed in the 1980s and have never fully recovered. And then there are the pythons. Burmese pythons, released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, found the Everglades to be perfect hunting ground. Since establishing a breeding population in the early 2000s, they've driven mammal populations into freefall. Raccoon sightings down 99.3%, opossums 98.9%, bobcats 87.5%. Marsh rabbits, cottontail rabbits, foxes, effectively gone from vast stretches of the park. This is what happens when you break an ecosystem. But here's what makes the Everglades extraordinary. We're trying to fix it. The Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, authorized in 2000, represents a 30-year, $10 billion commitment to restore the flow, to tear out some of those canals, to let water move as it once did, to give this ancient river a chance to heal itself. Will it work? Can you really undo a century of damage? Those are the questions that haunt every scientist, every engineer, every conservationist working in the Everglades today. To understand the Everglades, you need to understand limestone, not the dramatic cliffs of Yosemite or the spires of Bryce Canyon. The kind of limestone that lies flat and patient beneath your feet, porous as a sponge, dissolving slowly under acidic water, creating the foundation for one of the strangest landscapes in North America. The bedrock of South Florida began forming millions of years ago when this entire region sat beneath a shallow tropical sea. Tiny marine organisms, corals, mollusks, countless microscopic creatures lived, died, and settled to the ocean floor. Their calcium carbonate shells compressed into sedimentary rock over eons, layer upon layer. The Tamiami Formation formed roughly 6 million years ago. The Fort Thompson Formation, younger still, deposited during the ice ages when sea levels fluctuated wildly. And here's where it gets interesting. South Florida is flat, astonishingly, improbably flat. From Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay, a distance of over 100 miles, the elevation drops only about 15 feet. That's an average slope of less than 2 inches per mile. You could place a marble on the ground and it might not roll. This flatness, combined with porous limestone that absorbs water like a sponge, created the perfect conditions for something unprecedented, a river that flows as a sheet rather than through a channel. The Biscayne Aquifer, a layer of porous limestone deposited during the last ice age around 110,000 years ago, became a vast underground reservoir capable of storing immense quantities of water even during Florida's dry season. The climate did the rest. About 5,000 years ago, South Florida's weather pattern settled into its current rhythm. Wet summers, when warm waters surrounding the peninsula on 3 sides evaporate and dump 50 to 60 inches of rain annually. Sometimes tropical storms and hurricanes drop 24 inches in a single day across thousands of square miles. Dry, and winters when rainfall nearly stops and the land drinks from what it stored during the deluge. This created the Everglades ecosystem, a massive, slow-moving river of grass flowing from Lake Okeechobee, one of the largest lakes in North America, southward to Florida Bay. The Seminole and Miccosukee peoples who lived here for centuries called it Pahaioki, grassy waters. The name captured something essential that English-speaking settlers initially missed. Because the dominant plant here isn't actually grass. Sawgrass, Cladium jamescens, is a sedge, one of the oldest plant species on Earth, with serrated edges sharp enough to slice skin if you brush it the wrong way. It thrives in nutrient-poor conditions, requires almost nothing, and grows in vast prairies that stretch to the horizon. When wind sweeps across these prairies, the sawgrass ripples like ocean waves, creating the illusion of solid ground where there might be 6 inches of water beneath your feet. But the Everglades is more than sawgrass prairies. The National Park Service recognizes 9 distinct interdependent ecosystems within the park boundaries, each responding to subtle changes in water depth, duration, and salinity. Freshwater sloughs, the deeper channels where water flows most consistently, supporting aquatic plants and fish populations that feed wading birds. Hardwood hammocks, elevated islands of tropical forest dominated by mahogany, gumbo limbo, and strangler figs, rising just a few feet above the surrounding wetlands but supporting completely different communities of life. Pine rocklands, dry forest, growing on limestone outcrops, among the most endangered ecosystems in the world, now reduced to tiny fragments. Cypress swamps, dominated by bald cypress trees standing in dark water, their knees jutting above the surface like wooden stalagmites. Mangrove estuaries, where fresh water from the Everglades meets salt water from Florida Bay, creating brackish conditions that mangroves have mastered, their tangled roots forming nurseries for countless marine species. Florida Bay itself, over 800 square miles of shallow seagrass meadows, home to manatees, sea turtles, and fish populations that support both commercial and recreational fishing throughout South Florida. This diversity exists because of water, The quantity of water, the quality of water, the timing of water, the distribution of water. Change any of these variables and ecosystems shift, species populations fluctuate, entire communities of life reorganize themselves around new realities. The Everglades evolved over 5 millennia to handle seasonal flooding and drought. What it couldn't handle was humans with drainage schemes and unlimited ambition. The assault began in earnest in 1905 when Napoleon Bonaparte Broward campaigned for governor with a simple promise: drain the Everglades. He called the future of South Florida the Empire of the Everglades and compared its potential to Holland and Egypt. It would indeed be a commentary on the intelligence and energy of the state of Florida to confess that so simple an engineering feat as the drainage of a body of land above the sea was above their power, he told voters. They elected him, and he kept his promise. The state established the Internal Improvement Fund, using public money to entice private developers to drain land. Canals were cut from Lake Okeechobee to the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. The Caloosahatchee River was improved to carry excess water. Land was sold for $15 an acre to investors who'd never seen it, who believed the promotional materials promising rich farmland once the water was removed. The reality was more complicated. Yes, beneath the water lay muck, thousands of years of accumulated organic material that made excellent topsoil. But once exposed to air and sun, the muck oxidized rapidly, caught fire, and disappeared within a few growing seasons. What remained was limestone bedrock that required massive inputs of fertilizer for commercial agriculture. But the drainage continued. By 1920, fewer than 900,000 acres had been successfully drained despite enormous investment and political promises. The Internal Improvement Fund went bankrupt. Private developers failed. The state was paralyzed by financial collapse. Then came the hurricanes. In 1926, a massive hurricane devastated South Florida. In 1928, another struck, this one causing Lake Okeechobee to overflow its southern banks, drowning more than 2,500 people in one of America's deadliest natural disasters. The lake, no longer buffered by natural wetlands, had become a weapon. Florida turned to the federal government, specifically to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the only organization with the resources and expertise for such a monumental task. Between 1930 and 1938, the Corps built the Herbert Hoover Dike around Lake Okeechobee, 67.8 miles along the south shore, another 15.7 miles along the north shore, 34 feet tall, designed to prevent the lake from ever again drowning the surrounding communities. But the real transformation came after 1947. That year, 2 more hurricanes devastated South Florida, dumping 100 inches of rain and leaving standing water in suburban areas for months. The same year, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas published The Everglades River of Grass, raising national awareness of what was being lost. In 1948, Congress authorized the Central and Southern Florida Project for flood control and other purposes. The name itself reveals the priority: flood control first, everything else second. The Army Corps of Engineers received a blank check to remake South Florida's hydrology entirely. What they built was staggering in scale and ambition. Over the next 2 decades, the Corps constructed more than 1,800 miles of canals and levees. They installed hundreds of water control structures, gates, pumps, spillways, capable of moving water wherever and whenever managers decided it should go. They divided the Everglades into water conservation areas, massive impoundments separated by levees, where water levels could be manipulated independently. The system worked exactly as designed. It protected urban areas from flooding. It provided reliable water supply to Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and the rapidly growing Gold Coast. It created hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland in the GE Everglades agricultural area south of Lake Okeechobee, where sugarcane and vegetables now grow on land that was recently sawgrass prairie. South Florida's population exploded. In 1950, about 500,000 people lived in the Miami metropolitan area. By 2020, that number exceeded 6 million. Today, nearly 9 million people depend on the Everglades for drinking water, drawing from the aquifer that the wetlands recharge. The engineering achievement was undeniable. The ecological cost was catastrophic. Because the Corps had done something unprecedented. They'd turned a river on and off. Water that once flowed continuously based on rainfall and Lake Okeechobee's natural overflow now moved only when humans opened gates and turned on pumps. The sheet flow, that wide, slow, consistent movement of water that defined the entire ecosystem, was broken into fragments. Too much water in some areas, not enough in others. Wrong timing everywhere. Wading birds provide the clearest evidence of ecosystem collapse. In the 1930s, researchers estimated that hundreds of thousands of wading birds, herons, egrets, wood-storks, roseate spoonbills, white ibis, nested in the Everglades. These birds are indicator species, meaning their populations reflect the overall health of the ecosystem. They depend on specific water conditions to concentrate fish in shallow pools where the birds can feed efficiently during nesting season. By the 1990s, wading bird populations had declined by more than 90%. Wood-storks, once common, were listed as endangered. The timing was wrong. When water levels dropped too early, fish dispersed before chicks hatched. When water stayed too high too long, birds couldn't access prey. When water was released in massive pulses to prevent flooding in urban areas, it disrupted the natural rhythm that evolution had fine-tuned over millennia. The Florida panther tells an even grimmer story. Once, this subspecies of cougar ranged across the entire southeast, from Arkansas and Louisiana east to the Atlantic, from Tennessee south to Florida. By the 1970s, habitat loss and hunting had reduced the population to perhaps 20 animals, all confined to a small area in southwest Florida where the Everglades met Big Cypress Swamp. 20 animals. The species was functionally extinct. Conservation efforts began in earnest. Habitat protection, wildlife corridors. In 1995, the Genetic Restoration Program introduced 8 female Texas cougars to increase genetic diversity and combat inbreeding depression that was causing kinked tails, heart defects, and low sperm counts in Florida panthers. The program worked. The population tripled to about 100 animals by 2007. As of 2024, roughly 200 Florida panthers survive in the wild. They're still critically endangered. They still face threats from vehicle collisions, the leading cause of death, habitat fragmentation, and mercury contamination from environmental pollution that accumulates through the food chain. But they exist. Against overwhelming odds, they persist in the hardwood hammocks and pine flatwoods that remain. Then there's the issue that blindsided everyone: Burmese pythons. The first confirmed sighting of a Burmese python in Everglades National Park occurred in 1979. It was considered a curiosity, probably an escaped or released pet. By the 1990s, a few more sightings were reported, still not alarming. People release exotic pets all the time. Most don't survive or establish breeding populations. But Burmese pythons aren't most exotic pets. Native to Southeast Asia, these constrictors can grow over 18 feet long, weigh more than 200 pounds, and consume prey up to 100% of their body mass. They're dietary generalists. They'll eat anything they can catch and swallow: birds, mammals, reptiles, even alligators. They can survive months without food, but when prey is abundant, they eat regularly and grow quickly. The Everglades provided perfect conditions: warm climate year-round, abundant water, dense vegetation for cover, and, critically, a prey base completely unadapted to defend against them. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew destroyed a python breeding facility, releasing hundreds of snakes into the wild. That event, combined with continued releases by overwhelmed pet owners, established a breeding population that went largely undetected for years. Pythons are cryptic, nocturnal, and incredibly difficult to find in dense sawgrass and mangroves. By the time scientists confirmed a breeding population in the early 2000s, it was already too late to stop them. The impact has been devastating beyond anything invasion biologists predicted. A 2012 study compared road surveys from the 1990s, before pythons proliferated, to surveys from 2003 to 2011. The results were shocking. Raccoons, once the most commonly seen mammal in the Everglades, had declined 99.3%. Opossums, 98.9%. Bobcats, 87.5%. Marsh rabbits, cottontail rabbits, and foxes, species that Everglades rangers described as abundant in the 1980s, had effectively disappeared from vast areas of the park. 99% decline in just over a decade. Another study released radio-tagged marsh rabbits into areas known to harbor pythons. Within 11 months, 77% of rabbits that died were killed by pythons. The rabbits didn't last a year. This collapse cascades through the entire ecosystem. Native predators, panthers, bobcats, raptors, lose their primary food sources. Wading birds that fed on small mammals find less prey. Plant communities change because mammals that dispersed seeds and controlled vegetation are gone. The pythons themselves may inadvertently disperse seeds from the mammals they consume, potentially spreading both native and invasive plant species in unpredictable ways. Tens of thousands of Burmese pythons now inhabit South Florida. The actual number is impossible to determine. They're simply too difficult to detect. They've spread from Everglades National Park north to Palm Beach County and west across Collier County. They're found in Big Cypress National Preserve, the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge, private lands, suburban areas. Management efforts are ongoing but challenging. The South Florida Water Management District employs teams of trained python hunters who search designated lands daily. The Florida Python Challenge, an annual competition, attracts hundreds of participants who removed nearly 200 pythons in 2024. Since 2000, organized removal efforts have eliminated over 5,000 pythons from the ecosystem. 5,000 sounds impressive until you realize it's likely a tiny fraction of the total population. And every python removed leaves thousands more still out there, still breeding, still consuming whatever mammals remain. Researchers have explored various control methods. Radio transmitters implanted in Judas pythons to track them to breeding aggregations. Trained dogs to detect python scent. Drone surveys using thermal imaging. Biological controls like parasites or pathogens, though these carry risks of unintended consequences. Nothing has worked at scale. The pythons are here to stay. This grim reality represents the modern Everglades, an ecosystem under siege from multiple directions simultaneously, water management that fragments natural flow, agricultural runoff carrying phosphorus and nitrogen that fuel algae blooms and disrupt the nutrient-poor conditions many native species require, urban development consuming land at the edges, climate change raising sea levels and pushing saltwater inland, mercury contamination from industrial sources accumulating in the food chain, invasive plants like melaleuca, Brazilian pepper, and old world climbing fern outcompeting native vegetation, and pythons eating everything that moves. Yet amid this litany of threats, something remarkable happened. People decided to fight back. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who published The Everglades River of Grass in 1947, lived to be 108 years old. She spent the last decades of her life as a fierce environmental advocate. In 1969, at age 79, she founded Friends of the Everglades, specifically to stop construction of a massive jetport being planned in Big Cypress Swamp. The jetport would have been larger than all of Miami's airports combined, built in the heart of critical panther habitat, generating noise pollution across thousands of square miles of wilderness. Douglas spoke at public hearings, mobilized supporters, and refused to back down, despite being, in her words, a small old lady half the size of her fellow speakers. Her force of personality and moral clarity swayed the debate. The jetport was stopped. Only one runway was built before the project was cancelled. That land is now part of Big Cypress National, the preserve, established in 1974. Douglas's activism symbolized a broader shift in American environmental consciousness, the first Earth Day in 1970, the Clean Water Act in 1972, the Endangered Species Act in 1973, a growing recognition that wetlands weren't wastelands to be conquered, but ecosystems providing essential services, flood control, water purification, wildlife habitat, carbon storage, storm surge protection. By the late 1980s, the evidence was overwhelming. The Central and Southern Florida project, despite its success at flood control and water supply, had broken the Everglades. Something had to change. In 2000, Congress authorized the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, CERP for short. It remains the largest hydrologic restoration project ever attempted in human history. The scope is almost difficult to comprehend. Over 60 separate projects spanning 30 years, with an estimated cost exceeding $10 billion, split roughly equally between federal and state governments. The goal isn't to restore the Everglades to some pristine pre-Columbian state. That's impossible with 9 million people, depending on the region's water supply. The goal is something more pragmatic, to restore as much of the natural water flow as possible while maintaining flood protection and water supply for South Florida's population. The strategy involves capturing and storing water that currently gets dumped into the ocean during the wet season, then releasing it back into the Everglades during the dry season to mimic natural patterns. This requires building massive above-ground reservoirs, constructing treatment wetlands to remove phosphorus from agricultural runoff before it enters protected areas, removing sections of canals and levees, and creating flowways to redirect water back into historic sheet flow patterns. Some projects are already complete or underway. The Picayune Strand Restoration Project removed nearly 70 miles of roads and plugged canals that had drained wetlands for a failed housing development from the 1960s. A pump station now directs fresh water back into what is now protected land, improving habitat for the endangered Florida panther and restoring natural flow to nearby estuaries. The Kissimmee River restoration represents one of CERP's signature achievements. The river originally meandered for over 100 miles from headwaters near Orlando to Lake Okeechobee. In the 1960s, the Corps channelized it into a 52-mile canal to control flooding, essentially turning a winding river into a straight ditch. The ecological damage was immediate. Floodplain wetlands dried up, wading bird populations crashed, fish spawning habitat disappeared. Restoration began in 1999. Engineers filled sections of the canal and allowed the river to flow through its original meandering channel again. Floodplain wetlands returned. By 2020, over 44 square miles of river floodplain ecosystem had been restored. Wading bird populations rebounded. Fish diversity increased. Water quality improved. The Kissimmee restoration proved that rivers, given half a chance, can heal themselves. The biggest CERP project currently underway is the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, a massive above-ground storage facility being constructed on land south of Lake Okeechobee. When complete, it will cover approximately 16 square miles and hold 240,000 acre-feet of water. The contract, awarded in 2024 for nearly $3 billion, is the largest single contract in the Jacksonville District Corps of Engineers history. This reservoir will capture water during the wet season that would otherwise be discharged to tide, store it, treat it to remove phosphorus, and release it to the Everglades during the dry season when the ecosystem needs it most. It addresses one of the fundamental problems created by the original flood control project. The Everglades now gets too much water at the wrong times and not enough water at the right times. Recent funding has accelerated restoration efforts. The bipartisan infrastructure law provided over $1 billion specifically for Everglades restoration, the largest single federal investment in the project's history. Multiple contracts were awarded in 2024 for reservoirs, stormwater treatment areas, and seepage management projects designed to reduce water loss from the Central Everglades. But restoration faces enormous challenges beyond funding and engineering. Climate change is altering the baseline conditions that restoration efforts are designed to achieve. Sea level rise pushes saltwater farther inland, threatening freshwater ecosystems and the coastal aquifer that provides drinking water to millions. More intense hurricanes dump massive amounts of rain in short periods, overwhelming storage capacity. Changed rainfall patterns may shift the wet season, dry season dynamic that defines the ecosystem. Agricultural interests resist projects that might reduce farmland, or impose stricter water quality standards. The Everglades agricultural area produces about half of America's sugarcane and significant quantities of vegetables. These operations represent billions of dollars in economic activity and thousands of jobs. Balancing agricultural production with ecosystem restoration remains politically contentious. Urban development continues at the edges of protected areas. South Florida's population grows by roughly 1,000 people per day. Each new resident requires water, generates waste, and creates demand for infrastructure that fragments wildlife corridors and consumes wetland buffers. And the pythons keep eating everything. Despite these obstacles, restoration continues. Scientists monitor water quality, tracking phosphorus levels, dissolved oxygen, and salinity gradients. Hydrologists model flow patterns, testing scenarios for how removing levees or opening flowways might restore sheet flow. Ecologists survey wildlife, populations, documenting changes in wading bird nesting success, fish abundance, and plant community composition. The data shows mixed results. Some areas have improved significantly. Wading bird nesting numbers have increased in recent years when water conditions were favorable, though populations remain far below historical levels. Water quality in some treatment areas has improved. Fish populations in restored sections of the Kissimmee River are more diverse and abundant. Other indicators remain troubling. Seagrass beds in Florida Bay, which collapsed in the 1980s from inadequate freshwater flow, have shown limited recovery. The Florida panther population, while growing slowly, remains critically endangered and vulnerable to genetic bottlenecks. Invasive species continue spreading despite aggressive control efforts. Perhaps the most honest assessment is this: we're learning how to restore a subtropical wetland ecosystem by trial and error on the largest, most expensive scale imaginable. Nobody has done this before. There are no blueprints, no instruction manuals, no guarantee of success. What makes Everglades restoration unique among environmental projects is that failure isn't an option. This isn't a wilderness area that could be written off if restoration proves too difficult or expensive. 9 million people depend on the Everglades for drinking water. Coastal communities depend on mangrove estuaries for storm surge protection. Florida's fishing industry depends on Florida Bay as a nursery for commercially important species. Miami-Dade County's economy depends on tourists visiting Everglades National Park. The Everglades isn't just an ecosystem worth saving for its own sake, though it absolutely is that. It's infrastructure, the largest water treatment facility in the world, the most important storm buffer protecting South Florida from hurricanes, the foundation supporting a regional economy worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Marjorie Stoneman. Douglas understood this in 1947 when she titled the final chapter of her book, The 11th Hour, and warned that the Everglades were dying but could still be saved. She spent the next 50 years proving that one determined person could make a difference. She died in 1998 at age 108. Her ashes were spread in Everglades National Park, her river of grass. When asked on her 100th birthday whether she had hope for the survival of the Everglades, she reportedly answered with characteristic directness, "Of course I do. What else is there?" That might be the most important lesson the Everglades teaches. Ecosystems can be damaged, broken, fragmented, invaded, and polluted, but they don't give up. Life persists. Given enough water at the right time, sawgrass prairies can recover. Wading birds will nest if conditions improve. Even critically endangered Florida panthers cling to survival and slowly increase their numbers when given protected habitat and genetic assistance. The Everglades fights back, and so do we. Scientists developing new restoration techniques, engineers designing pump stations and flowways, land managers removing invasive species, python hunters searching the swamps daily, politicians funding restoration projects, tribal nations working to protect water that flows through their ancestral lands. Millions of visitors each year who come to see what remains and leave understanding why it matters. This is the modern Everglades, neither pristine wilderness nor completely conquered landscape, but something in between. A hybrid ecosystem where human engineering and natural processes collide, compete, and sometimes if we're lucky and persistent. Collaborate. 5,000 years ago, rainfall and geology created the river of grass. For the next 5,000 years, it flowed undisturbed, supporting life in dizzying diversity, purifying water, storing carbon, protecting coastlines from storms. 100 years ago, we nearly destroyed it, in a single human lifetime. Now, we're spending billions of dollars and decades of effort trying to fix what we broke, learning humility in the process, discovering that dismantling an ecosystem is far easier than restoring one. The outcome remains uncertain. Climate change, invasive species, political resistance, and sheer complexity all threaten restoration success. But the effort continues because it must, because 9 million people need water, because endangered species deserve a chance, because some places are worth fighting for even when victory isn't guaranteed. The Everglades is one of those places. America's river of grass, still flowing, still fighting, still refusing, against all odds, to die.